The diner went quiet the moment the soldier stepped through the door, dust still clinging to his boots, his posture as sharp as his eyes. But no one expected what came next. He walked straight to the waitress and saluted. For nearly 15 years, Carolyn Davis, a warm-hearted server at Maplewood Diner, had worked the early shift. Her hands had slowed with age, but her kindness had never faded. After losing her son in Iraq, she found small ways to keep his spirit alive, like quietly feeding a little girl who arrived each morning with tired eyes and barely enough change for toast. The child, Emma, never spoke much. She'd sit alone, tuck herself into the corner booth, and order only what she could afford. But Carolyn always made sure she got more: a carton of milk, scrambled eggs, a fresh piece of fruit, always with a soft smile and no questions asked. That unspoken ritual ended the day a new manager, Todd, accused Carolyn of giving away company profits. He reassigned her to dish duty, away from the front counter, and away from Emma. Until one morning, when Emma showed up wearing a military jacket that swallowed her frame. Moments later, her father, Lieutenant Mark Crawford, walked in. He didn't speak right away. He just saluted Carolyn, then said, "She's the only one who helped my daughter survive this week." The entire diner fell silent, and kindness, once scolded, stood tall. When the soldier walked into the diner, dust still clinging to his boots and fatigue written across his face, no one expected what came next. Without hesitation, he scanned the room, locked eyes with a waitress wearing dish gloves, and marched over with purpose. Then, in front of everyone, he offered her a formal military salute. The room froze. But Carolyn Davis, stunned, had no idea that her quiet morning routine had just become a lesson in honor for everyone watching. For 15 years, Carolyn had served breakfast at Maplewood Diner. She was the kind of woman who remembered regulars' birthdays, who brought extra creamers for the elderly couple at table 4, and who wore a small gold star pin in memory of her son, Tyler, a soldier who never made it home from Iraq. 3 weeks ago, Carolyn noticed a young girl, no older than 9, slipping into the same corner booth every morning at exactly 6:05. Her name, Emma, peeked from the school ID on her backpack. She never ordered more than plain toast and never said much. But Carolyn saw more than a quiet child. She saw someone holding the weight of something far too heavy for her age. Each morning, Carolyn would bring her more than she ordered: a warm egg, a small fruit cup, a carton of milk, always saying it was extra from the kitchen. Emma never questioned it, just ate silently, with a flicker of peace returning to her tired eyes. But then Todd, the new manager, noticed. He pulled Carolyn aside and accused her of breaking company policy. "We're not a charity," he scolded. "Do it again, and you'll lose your shift." True to his word, he reassigned her to the dish station. Carolyn didn't stop caring. She simply watched helplessly as Emma sat alone again, this time with only a glass of water in front of her. That morning, she caught a glimpse of Emma wearing an oversized military jacket, the patches unmistakable. Minutes later, the front door chimed. Lieutenant Mark Crawford, Emma's father, had just returned from emergency training across state lines. His sister, who was supposed to care for Emma, had been stranded, leaving the little girl to navigate the mornings on her own. She never told anyone, except in a single letter to her dad. "There's a lady at the diner like you. She gives me food and doesn't ask questions." As the lieutenant stood in front of the stunned crowd, he held out a carefully folded American flag. "This flew over our base last month," he said. "It belongs to you now." Carolyn's hands trembled as she accepted it. "I only gave her pancakes," she whispered. "You gave her comfort when no one else did," he replied. "And you reminded her what kindness feels like." That morning, a diner changed. A plaque now hangs at the corner booth. where quiet kindness taught us how to serve. The moment Emma called out, "Daddy!" the entire diner fell into stunned silence. Chairs scraped softly as heads turned toward the little girl, now running from her booth into the arms of a soldier still covered in road dust. For weeks, no one had known much about the quiet child who showed up alone each morning. Just that she sat in the corner, ordered the cheapest item on the menu, and rarely spoke. But everything changed the instant Lieutenant Mark Crawford stepped through the door. 3 weeks earlier, Carolyn Davis, a 58-year-old waitress who had worked at Maplewood Diner for over a decade, noticed Emma. The girl was small, pale, and too quiet for someone her age. She clutched her backpack tightly and always ordered only toast, carefully counting coins. Carolyn's maternal instincts, still raw from losing her son Tyler in Iraq, couldn't ignore the signs. So she began adding extras: milk, eggs, a piece of fruit, always with a smile and a whispered excuse. The cook made too much. Emma never said thank you, but her eyes said enough. But the new manager, Todd, didn't see compassion. He saw a policy violation. When he caught Carolyn slipping an extra pancake onto Emma's plate, he reprimanded her publicly and reassigned her to the dishwashing station. From behind the kitchen window, Carolyn watched helplessly as Emma returned to her booth, this time served only a glass of water. And still, no one stood up. Not the regulars, not the staff. They all watched, then looked away. Until today. Lieutenant Crawford's arrival changed everything. His presence alone commanded attention, but his words silenced even the harshest critics. "My daughter hasn't spoken more than a handful of words since her mother deployed 6 months ago," he explained, emotion lacing his voice. "She was left alone for several mornings when our backup childcare fell through. She wrote me one line in a letter last week. 'There's a lady at the diner like you. She gives me food and doesn't ask questions.'" Then, facing Carolyn, he extended a perfectly folded American flag. "This flew over our base last month," he said, "and it belongs with you. You reminded my daughter what safety feels like." Carolyn, speechless, took the flag with trembling hands. Emma stepped beside her, wrapping tiny arms around the woman who had become her morning lifeline. "You smell like my mom," she whispered, the first full sentence anyone had heard her say in months. The diner's regulars stood and began to clap, slowly. An elderly veteran removed his cap. "Ma'am," he said, voice cracking, "I served 40 years ago. Never saw courage like yours." From that day forward, Carolyn's section was restored, her position honored. And Emma? She returned every morning, this time with her dad, always sitting in that same booth, now marked with a plaque, where someone who said nothing taught an entire diner how to treat kindness. When the diner's door creaked open that morning, no one expected anything unusual. Certainly not the tired waitstaff or the customers hunched over coffee and toast. But as the little girl in the oversized military jacket quietly took her usual seat in the corner booth, something felt different. Behind the counter, Carolyn Davis, relegated to dishwashing duty after weeks of silently helping the child, could only watch from the kitchen. For 3 weeks, Carolyn had been slipping food to Emma, a girl no older than 9 who arrived before dawn, counting change to buy dry toast. Emma never spoke much, and no adult ever came with her. Carolyn never asked questions. She only offered scrambled eggs, a milk carton, maybe a muffin. The cook made extra. But when the new manager, Todd, took over, he made one thing clear: no freebies. Carolyn was reprimanded and removed from the front of house, and the little girl, who once met Carolyn's eyes with the faintest flicker of trust, was now served only water. Then, as if summoned by fate, the diner door opened again, and Lieutenant Mark Crawford walked in. His boots were still dusty, His uniform was crisp but weary. Without a word, his daughter ran into his arms, whispering, "Daddy," in a voice no one had heard her use. The entire diner went still. "I've just returned from emergency training across state lines," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And I need to know who helped my daughter survive while I was gone." When Carolyn stepped out, rubber gloves still on her hands, Emma immediately pointed. Her. What followed was not a reprimand, but a salute. Lieutenant Crawford snapped to attention. "Ma'am," he said to Carolyn, "you've done what no system managed to do. You kept my daughter warm, fed, and seen." He handed Carolyn a folded American flag. "This flew over our base last month, and it belongs with you." He then passed her a letter, written in a child's careful scrawl. "Thank you for the pancakes. They made me remember Moms." That morning, Emma spoke more than she had in weeks. "You smell like my mom," she whispered, clinging to Carolyn's apron. The entire diner erupted into quiet applause. Even Mr. Peterson, the gruff old regular, stood and removed his cap. "Ma'am, I served in Nam," he said, "and I've never seen bravery like yours." Todd was left speechless. The owner, informed by customers, arrived hours later. Not only did he reinstate Carolyn's full position, he gave her a raise and the authority to feed any child she deemed in need. And so, the quiet booth in the corner got a new plaque, where a silent act of kindness spoke louder than any order ever could. Every day, before the sun rose, Carolyn Davis tied her apron, brewed the first pot of coffee at Rosie's Diner, and prepared for the early rush. But for the past 3 weeks, she had an unspoken ritual, a plate of food she paid for herself, quietly set in front of a small, silent girl who always came alone. Emma, no more than 9 years old, arrived at exactly 6:05 a.m., her backpack worn and oversized for her frame. She barely spoke, barely smiled. Each morning she ordered only toast, counting out coins with meticulous care. Carolyn noticed the shadows under her eyes, the way she watched the door as if waiting for someone who might never come. So Carolyn added a carton of milk, an apple, maybe scrambled eggs, always with the excuse the cook made too much. But kindness came at a cost. The new manager, Todd, didn't like it. "We're not a charity," he barked, after catching her sliding an extra pancake onto Emma's plate. The next day, Carolyn was reassigned to dish duty, and Emma's plate was reduced to just dry toast, if even that. No one said a word. Not the regulars, not the waitstaff, not even when Emma stopped eating mid-bite, her eyes cast low with shame. Carolyn's hands, raw from soap and heat, ached not from work, but from powerlessness. Then one morning, everything changed. The bell above the door jingled. A man stepped inside, boots caked in road dust, fatigue on his face, his uniform still bearing his rank. Lieutenant Mark Crawford. "Daddy!" Emma cried, her first word spoken aloud in weeks. The diner froze. He swept her into his arms, then scanned the room. "I've just returned from emergency deployment," he said. "Who's been helping my daughter?" Carolyn emerged from the kitchen. Emma pointed. "Her!" Without hesitation, Lieutenant Crawford approached and snapped to attention. "Ma'am," he said solemnly, "you gave my daughter what no agency could: dignity, warmth, and someone to notice her." He handed Carolyn a folded American flag. "This flew over our base last month. We don't forget those who serve without uniforms." He then passed her a note, written in shaky but determined letters. "Thank you for the pancakes. They made me remember Moms." Around them, the diner changed. Regulars stood. One elderly man removed his cap. Another offered applause. "Todd?" He said nothing. The owner, informed shortly after, restored Carolyn's position, gave her a raise, and granted her discretion to feed any child in need. That booth in the corner now holds a plaque. This is where quiet kindness became a lifeline. Because sometimes saving someone doesn't take orders or medals, just a plate of pancakes and a heart willing to see the unseen. It started with a simple act, a waitress, a plate of pancakes, and a quiet little girl with eyes too sad for her age. Carolyn Davis, a seasoned server at Rosie's Diner, wasn't new to hard mornings or hard stories. But when 9-year-old Emma began showing up alone each day at 6:05 a.m., Carolyn's instincts told her something wasn't right. Emma would order the cheapest thing on the menu, dry toast, and eat in silence. Her clothes were wrinkled, her eyes heavy. She never looked up unless spoken to, and even then, she rarely spoke. Carolyn didn't ask questions. She just started adding a few things to Emma's plate. A small milk carton, an apple, a scrambled egg. She'd smile gently and say, "The cook made too much today." But not everyone shared her kindness. Todd, the new manager, caught on quickly. "No handouts," he scolded. "This is a business." He punished Carolyn by moving her to the dishwashing station and cutting her hours. The regulars saw what was happening but stayed silent. Emma kept coming, kept ordering toast, and kept being ignored, until the morning her world changed. The door swung open. A man in full military uniform entered the diner. Dust clung to his boots. His posture was perfect, but his eyes were heavy with exhaustion. "Daddy!" Emma cried. Her voice, which had been missing for weeks, rang out as she rushed into his arms. Lieutenant Mark Crawford had just returned from emergency training out of state. Seeing the diner and the people inside, he spoke with calm authority. "My daughter hasn't spoken in nearly a month," he said, "and in her last letter to me, all she wrote was this: 'There's someone like you at the diner. They give me pancakes and don't ask questions.'" Silence fell. Carolyn stepped forward, still in her dish gloves. Emma pointed, eyes wide with gratitude. "Her!" Lieutenant Crawford snapped to attention and saluted. "You kept my daughter warm when I couldn't. I owe you more than I can say." He handed Carolyn a folded American flag. "This flew over our base last month. Please accept it. Not for charity, but for courage." Then he passed her a handwritten note from Emma. "Thank you for the pancakes. They made me remember Mom's." Tears welled in Carolyn's eyes. In that moment, the diner changed. Regulars stood and applauded. The diner owner, called in shortly after, overruled Todd, restored Carolyn's position, and gave her permission to feed any child she believed needed it. 1 week later, a small brass plaque appeared on the corner booth. This is where kindness didn't ask for permission. Because true service doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears an apron and a quiet smile, and saves lives just the same. It started with a plate of pancakes and a girl who hadn't spoken in weeks. For nearly a month, little Emma Crawford, just 9 years old, showed up at Rosie's Diner every morning at 6:05 a.m. Alone. She always ordered the cheapest thing, plain toast, and sat in the corner booth, backpack hugged tightly to her chest. No words, just silence and shadows under her eyes. Most of the staff looked past her. But Carolyn Davis, a 58-year-old waitress with a quiet heart and a son lost in Iraq, couldn't. Each morning, Carolyn would accidentally bring more than toast, scrambled eggs, fruit, a warm pancake, explaining it with a wink and a whisper. The cook made too much again. It was their secret ritual. But when a new manager, Todd, noticed, he lashed out. "This isn't a charity," he barked. He docked Carolyn's hours, pushed her into dishwashing duty, and forbade all staff from giving away food. Emma's table grew emptier. Her eyes dimmed further. Then, one morning, she showed up wearing an oversized military jacket, sleeves rolled up over small arms. Her toast arrived with only water. Todd had ensured it. Carolyn, watching from the kitchen, fought back tears until the bell above the door rang. Lieutenant Mark Crawford, Emma's father, stepped into the diner, boots dusty, face exhausted but posture straight. He had just returned from emergency training, unaware his daughter had been fending for herself. Emma saw him and cried out, "Daddy," her first spoken word in weeks. The diner froze. Lieutenant Crawford embraced her, then scanned the room. "Who's been helping my daughter?" he asked. Carolyn stepped forward, rubber gloves still on, unsure if she'd be scolded next. Instead, the soldier stood at attention and saluted. "Ma'am, I owe you a debt I can't repay." He explained how Emma had refused to speak or eat until Carolyn's small acts of kindness gave her warmth, dignity, and hope. He handed Carolyn a folded American flag from his base and a note Emma had written, the first in months. It read simply, "Thank you for the pancakes. They made me remember Moms." Carolyn's hands trembled. The diner fell silent, then rose in applause. Veterans removed hats, patrons wiped their eyes. Todd, pale and shaken, could only watch as the diner rallied around Carolyn and the child she quietly saved. From that day on, a plaque sat at Emma's corner booth. This is where quiet kindness changed everything. Because sometimes the greatest heroes don't wear armor. They wear aprons. Carolyn never expected recognition. As a longtime waitress in a small-town diner, her days were filled with repetition, refilling coffee, scribbling orders, wiping counters. But then Emma showed up. A small girl with tired eyes, always alone, always ordering the cheapest thing on the menu. Carolyn noticed the silence in her eyes, the hunger behind her politeness. So she did what no rule book told her to. She gave the girl extra food, warm pancakes, a quiet smile. When her new manager found out, he called it unprofessional, said she was breaking policy. He moved her to dish duty, punished her for her compassion. But Carolyn didn't stop caring. Until one morning, a man in dusty military boots walked into the diner. He didn't shout, he didn't scold, he saluted. That man was Emma's father, just returned from emergency training, unaware that his daughter had been fending for herself. Until Carolyn noticed, until someone cared. Kindness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's pancakes at dawn, a seat kept warm, a silent shield when the world forgets to look closer. If you believe small acts of compassion carry the power to change a life, leave a comment. Share a moment you were seen, or made someone feel seen. And if these stories remind you of the goodness still in the world, subscribe now. Because the quietest kindness often echoes the loudest in someone's heart.